Janae, is to mute your microphone, only because these microphones pick up all kind of extraneous noise, and you'd be shocked about all the dogs barking and babies crying that we've heard. Not where you are, probably, but so I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, well, first I have to come back here, then say share my screen. Oh, you need to stop sharing your screen, Laura.
Oh, I'm sorry. Stop share. Stop.
Yeah, there we go. Excellent. All right, so now share my screen. And yeah, now it's taking a nap. There we go. Jeepers, that was strange. Okay, I don't know what's going on here. There we go. All right, finally. Well, thanks for coming, you two. And I know it's one of those days, particularly if you're teaching in, K through 12. And forgive my voice. I have a cold that's been going through our office like wildfire. Unbelievable. But I thought I just over the weekend said to my husband, I think I've escaped. And lo and behold, yesterday, it started to hit me. But anyway, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just walk you through, and I'll be very succinct about this because I don't want to take up too much of your time on a day like we've had. I'm sure you're pressed because you've probably been delayed today. But what this is really about, what this presentation is about, is assessment and aligning it. And, I'm in higher ed, and one of the things that we hear all the time, and I don't think it's any different in K-12 than it is higher ed, and that is students who say that assessments are, and that means tests or anything. We get feedback from students that say, it's tricky, it's too hard, it's not what we were supposed to be tested on, it's unfair. I don't think there's anyone who's been instructing for any length of time who hasn't heard some of those complaints. And so let me ask both of you, one is Janae, and I'm sorry, Toby. What do you think of if a student comes to you and says, boy, that test was really unfair? What does that say to you? Either one of you can just jump in. You have to unmute first, though.
Well, I think it's either a reflection on my inability to properly design an assessment, or, I mean, it obviously could potentially be their inability or lack to study and prepare for that assessment.
Right.
Or providing them materials to review with as well, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I mean, you're being very logical about it, and that's great because there are all kinds of reactions to that. Because I deal with higher ed mostly, the first thing we hear is that, well, the students didn't study. And that may or may not be true. And so what we're going to talk about today is really how to align your tests and your assessments and your learning activities with what your learning objectives are. And I think you folks are probably are closer to it, frankly, and probably do it better and almost instinctively than some of the folks I deal with on a regular basis. I know that's sad to say, and I'm being recorded, but that's true. So anyway, here are our learning objectives for today. We're going to talk about transfer. And we're going to, consider that how important transfer is and what we want students to take away from a class or a topic that we're teaching to the next level. Then we're going to look at instructional assignment. And then we're going to look at formative and summative assessments. And Janae, this is to your point, where you say maybe they didn't review well enough, or I didn't give them good enough material. By using both these formative and summative assessments, then you can nip that in the bud early on. You can see if you've got issues with that. And then lastly, we're going to go over a technique that's called test blueprinting. Test blueprinting, in most cases, has been one of the most effective things that we've been working with faculty to do. My colleague and I have shared this in twice, actually, at the teaching professor. And we've shared it once it got such good feedback that they asked us to come as invited presenters last year to just sort of do a repeat. And it's because it's pretty easy to do, a lot of work, but it's understandable and it's real flexible. So we're going to go over that. Okay, so basically we need to teach in ways that move the students toward whatever your learning objectives are. And we have to do that via proxies, right? Because if you're teaching science, for example, you're going to try to do it with little activities on the bench top to show them how to do basic and acidic kinds of things. You know, what does that mean? But it really doesn't correspond necessarily to what they may be doing as they go forward in a college classroom or in another type of classroom. But we can't just hope that they get it. I mean, a lot of us do. I taught computer science for a long time, and sometimes you just hope that they've caught on to programming. Oops, there we go. So we hope that a miracle occurs, something happens, and they just get it. There are two kinds of transfer to consider. One is near transfer, and that would be, oh, you teach your student how to drive a car. You can assume pretty well that they will probably be able to drive a truck too. However, they may not be able to drive a tank if they're going into the military. Far transfer, once the student is adept at something, they have to keep practicing. So think in terms of, an example we use a lot is chess. So you teach a student to be a really good chess player, and he or she learns all the strategic moves when it comes to chess. And that's a very complicated game and can have very complicated moves throughout the game. But when someone knows it, when someone gets the strategy, they may also be able to understand the underlying principles and be able to transfer that to something like military maneuvers or traffic control. So by having them practice over and over and over in their near transfer, you are helping them build those scaffolds so that they can take what they're learning from you in this small setting and be able to transfer it to a bigger setting. But we need to teach with that in mind. And it doesn't matter what level you're teaching with. It really matters. So you all probably have figured this out. You've probably seen it a million times. But I've got to tell you, none of you will ever go to anything from the Schreyer Institute, and I said this to Laura's group, without us talking about learning objectives and how they have to align. We don't do anything without talking about that alignment and how important that really is. So learning objectives is the transfer of learning. Okay, what will students know or be able to do? Number one, when you're writing those, is make sure they're measurable. You can't use what we here affectionately call weasel words, meaning students will understand, students will appreciate, students will be familiar. Those are weasel words because they do not directly, you cannot directly measure any one of them. And when I see a syllabus or something that has a learning objective that says students will understand the genesis of the turtle's shell, we always have to pull back and say, well, how are you going to know that they understand it? And the response will be, well, they're going to take a test. Okay, they're going to take a test. What will they have to know? How will they learn the material? And so that learning that they do, be it memorizing, be it defining, be it citing, be it drawing, I don't care what it is, whatever that learning activity happens to be about the turtle shell, that's the learning objective. Okay, students will explain the evolution of a turtle shell through drawings, through memorizing the way it fits in the file, whatever it is. So a learning objective has to be discrete. Now, again, I think I'm talking to a group here and that really understands that. Not all faculty at any level do. Then there are the instructional activities. Okay, so now you have a really good learning objective. How do you figure out what experiences will help students as they acquire that knowledge? So if you're teaching them to drive a car, what are the best experiences to help them? Maybe number one, it's learning the rules of the road. Excellent, okay. But then, what are you gonna do? Just sit them in a car and give them a test? Well, no, you probably need to have them practice. First, maybe in a model, then maybe on the road in a parking lot, then maybe, so you're gonna scaffold them up. So again, what's your objective and what moves students toward that learning? And lastly, how are you gonna measure that? If it's something that they need to memorize, we occasionally will find nursing faculty. They're one of my favorites. I work with nursing a lot, and they're my favorite people. But I've occasionally gotten questions from them like, should I have students memorize what a normal blood glucose is? And I'm always stunned by that, quite frankly, because yes, if I'm going to be in the ER and I've got a nurse who doesn't know what the normal blood glucose is, I'm going to be in trouble. So yes, they should memorize those things, and that's okay. If you want them to do something more explicit or more in-depth, you know, to look at a case, well, that's a different learning objective. You're looking at that more bar transfer business. But they need to know the basics. There are foundational activities that students must know in order to move forward. Okay, you have these in your hands, I believe. This is just a graphic of Bloom's taxonomy. If you turn it over, what you'll see is that it has actually, I'm not showing you both sides. This is one side that gives you some words that as you're writing your objectives, you may want to use these words. On the back, it describes what these levels mean, what remembering means, understanding, applying, etc. Excuse me. What not to do is get yourself wrapped around worrying about whether you're using lower order thinking skills or higher order thinking skills. That depends on what course you are teaching. So maybe as you're moving forward, you want your students at the beginning, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but we often work with graduate students who wrap themselves into pretzels trying not to say memorize, trying not to say recite or recall or whatever. They try not to do that because they think it's just too easy. And frankly, if you're teaching a course that has foundation knowledge, you need that. We all need that. No matter what our discipline was, no matter what we were doing, we have to have certain basic information. And that's where those lower order thinking skills make sense. This is just another version of that Bloom's taxonomy. We like this a lot, and this is just one of the domains. You should have a handout that has all the domains on. But we like this a lot because not only does it give you verbs, it gives you model questions. And so when you're writing an objective, you can use some of the language from these model questions in order to write your objective. The instructional strategies, meaning how am I going to teach it, those are suggestions for the model questions. And it's sort of not a one-to-one correspondence. You can figure out what works best for you. But we like this, and you'll see that there's a link at the bottom. Excuse me, this is actually out of the University of Colorado's website. However, it's really from Ooey Pooey, so that's where we first encountered it. All right, so again, we see this triangle. And it's the same as we talked about earlier. The transfer of learning is the objective. Diagnosing and scaffolding are the learning activities. Authentic assessment is how are you going to figure out whether students did acquire the learning. However, assessment comes in a couple of flavors. You can have formative assessment and summative assessment. They are both extremely important. Can I stop here and ask, are y'all familiar with formative and summative assessments? And you can unmute to respond.
Yeah, I think most of us are familiar. We went through it during our time at Penn State. We talked a lot about the different types of assessments.
Great. That's excellent. Well, someone, and I call on you, Toby, but I don't want to put you on the spot. Can someone tell me about a formative assessment that they use in a classroom now?
I just used an app called Recap that I stole from another school. So shout out to Doug, who's on here, in my small grade sentence class, and had them kind of summarize and review some of the parts that we were going over. And it's really quick, and I can do it in a few minutes. And they just make a quick video talking about the function of individual parts or whatever the situation may have been.
Great. And what happens if they're not where you think they should be? How do you tell if they're not where you think that they should be?
Well, the unique part is it allows, this particular app allows them to kind of rate themselves, but also allows them to give feedback on their peers. So between my viewing of their quick video clip or peers viewing, we can kind of take a poll on who gets it, who doesn't get it. Do we need to go back and review, or just spend some one-on-one time talking about something individually?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. You're getting information from them, and they're getting information from you. And we occasionally will ask faculty, so what do you do about that? If all of a sudden your students don't get what you think they got? Well, some of them don't do anything, which is very sad. But some of them say, well, apparently I have to go back. I have to go back and redo what I did, maybe in a different way. Maybe you're just not, you didn't connect. I mean, we've all had it happen. Anyone who's taught has had the class where things didn't go well. And things didn't go well. And so it's up to you as a professional to be able to say, okay, let's go back. Let's put a stop to the wrong answers. Let's figure out what's going on. So that formative assessment is formative from two levels. It's formative to the student, and it's formative to you. So it cannot be underestimated. The idea of authentic assessments is that the assessment is authentic to exactly what they're learning at that particular time. So, integrating it, we do a lot of talking about testing and how testing is a learning experience, but integrating it means that it's authentic to whatever you're doing at that particular time. Too often we're seeing tests, and there are a number of colleges here that do that. They are standardized tests, and they may not conform, or they may not sync up with what the students really learned, quote unquote, in class. That's a problem. And that's when you start getting that idea of this is tricky, or it's not, I don't know it, or whatever, it's unfair. My favorite, it's unfair. So this is sort of the bottom line, is that formative assessments are assessments for learning, and summative assessments are assessments of learning. So summative is exactly what they are. It may be a final paper, it may be a project, it may be an exam. We're going to just go over really quickly some examples of this. But assessment for learning, I think, really does, it's advantageous to both you as well as your students. So this is just another way to look at that, is you see in this Venn diagram, I'm pointing at my screen, which of course none of you can see, but there's the overlap in that Venn diagram, where instruction and assessment overlap into learning. And that's why formative assessment is so important, because you've got that overlap, and it's a really good tool. Some examples, other examples, are these. I'm going to move this little box here a little bit, Laura. There we go. Is complex problem solving, concept tests, multi-step pair problem solving, minute papers, etc. Those are the kinds of things that students can do in class that will help you all, be able to assess where they are at any particular time. Again, because I work primarily in higher ed, we see a lot of faculty who just try to quote unquote cover the material. However, by stopping and using formative strategies, even for a few minutes, you are helping students to engage with whatever the material is. And I cannot emphasize enough how much that matters. And, you know, I must sound crazy, but it is absolutely the truth. I've observed classes where students do not engage at all with the material except for sitting and listening. And that really does not help their formative assessment. All righty. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to have you all do a little activity here. So I have chlorophyll and photosynthesis is the title of this. And what I'd like you to do is take out a paper and a pen, and I wish I could see you so I could keep an eye on y'all, but I can't. I'm going to ask you to write for 2 minutes without stopping. Don't pick your pen or pencil up from the paper, and write about chlorophyll and photosynthesis. You'll see that I've put a definition of what chlorophyll really is. It's very, it's very short. So I would like you to write about chlorophyll for 2 minutes without stopping. Okay? Does everybody have their paper and pencil? Give me a thumbs up if you do. Or say yes, either one.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to say go. 2 minutes. Don't stop. Don't pick your pencil up off the paper. You have 1 more minute. Okay, 5 more seconds. Wish I could watch it closer. Okay, you can stop. And so now I'm just going to call on a couple of you to tell me what you wrote. And Laura Metric, can you share with us what you wrote about chlorophyll and photosynthesis? You'll need to unmute. Oh, I'm not seeing a microphone. Do you not have a microphone?
She was saying that her audio keeps coming in and out, so she might be having trouble with that. So.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
She can type in, there's a text, well, we'll have to, there's a text box that Laura can put up there. If you can put up the text box, Laura, Laura Metric can type in the text box. How about Danae, since that was, I think that was you, Danae. What did you write?
Well, I started listing just like characteristics and things I already knew about chlorophyll. And then I kind of found myself asking questions of like, what if we didn't have chlorophyll, or what if we had limited natural light? How would chlorophyll function? So yeah.
Okay, excellent. Dean Masser, how about you? Why don't you tell us what you wrote? You need to unmute. You may not have unmuted. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me?
We
I'm
can
sorry, I'm not Doug Mosser, but I teach with him. I'm the other ag teacher, Jasmine Van Sant. We're kind of sharing his laptop a little bit.
Okay, that's fine. The two of you can go.
We also have guests coming in for some CDE practice today. This is like an open lab night for us. So we're kind of co-teaming it, but
Okay.
I'm on board. So we just kind of jotted down some information. Actually, this is kind of perfect topic for us because we're just starting to teach photosynthesis in our ag biology class.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and so this is kind of fits really well for us. So just like I was jotting down some ways like we kind of introduced it, or like ideas that we know from it. And so talked about plants and the different types of plants, the different types of chloroplasts that we find that aid in photosynthesis, and the chlorophyll and how that correlates with the chloroplasts and the rate of photosynthesis, because students are going to be testing different rates of photosynthesis. So looking at how that blends in with that equation, I guess.
That's excellent. Okay, and lastly, let me call on Toby because I know he's there somewhere. What did you write, Toby?
So I just tried to write it down. I started with just writing like basic information, like chlorophyll helps make the plants green. It's found in the chloroplast. And then I kind of went into writing down some other things and kind of like Janae said, some questions that I still kind of had about it, or things I wasn't sure of. Like, I think I've heard before that there's a lot of health benefits to chlorophyll specifically. What are they, that kind of thing, just things that I might have heard or read or glanced at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. All right, so what did this tell us? What did this tell us from everyone who shared with us their chlorophyll story here, their little 2-minute story? What does it tell you? This is not, I don't mean anything deep. There's something deep about this.
It sort of just brings everybody up to speed on what everybody else knows.
Yeah, it does that. It warms students up. So all of a sudden, and I'm sorry, you aren't DMaster, but I can't remember the name you gave me. I should have written it down. But, you're teaching a lab about chlorophyll. Your students now are connected. You're teaching about chlorophyll. So even if they write for 2 minutes that leaves are green and, at the basic level, now they're sort of connected. They're connected to that topic. This is from a strategy called Writing in the Quantitative Disciplines. And it's one of my favorite books. Excuse me. And it's also, this cold is just going to kill me. And it's also one of my favorite strategies because you can use it for anything. I used it, and Laura's heard this story. I used it for engineers, and I put Archimedes' principle on the screen. Now, if you're familiar with Archimedes' principle, that's how something floats. And this was a bunch of engineers, and so they knew what Archimedes' principle is. So you would think we would get all kinds of equations, but we didn't. What we got was a woman talking about how it impacts her water aerobics class, and someone else writing about how they may think about teaching that. Someone else wrote about a project they had. This was a Department of Defense institution here at Penn State. And so they talked about how they worked with ships and how that impacted their work with ships. So everyone has a context for this. But the fellow who developed this, his name is Patrick Balls, and he was from, I don't know if he's still there now, but he was from North Carolina State University. He was a mathematician, and he used to have students write in mathematics. He said you cannot have students write enough, no matter what you're doing. So this gives them some exposure to writing, and it connects with whatever they're going to do in class. And so it's a really simple but powerful strategy. And it tells me information and it tells you information. You as the faculty member and you as the student and me as the faculty member, what's going on. So anyway, this was, as I said, this comes from a book called Writing Across the Quantitative Disciplines by Patrick Balls. It's a great book. Very simple, very thin. Nothing fancy about it. All right, moving on, because I really don't want to keep you very long today, because I realize you've had long days already. Assessment of learning is the summative part. And this, of course, as you know, are the final exams. These are the final papers or final projects. These are the high stakes kinds of assessments that students worry about so much. If you've done a lot of formative type of assessments that mimic your summative assessments, you're probably going to have students that do pretty well and understand what they're being asked to do on their tests. We often run into, and this is, don't tell anyone, this is really rife in engineering, we run into faculty who will teach discrete pieces of engineering topics, and then when it comes to the exam, they'll do something, they'll put something on the exam that the student has never seen before, assuming that the student in a high stakes, timed, high stress environment is going to be able to put all these pieces together. And only the very best student can do that, and sometimes not even the best student can do that. So what we always recommend is that if you want to test something very complex, the student needs to practice. This goes back to that transfer business. You really need to give students practice in whatever you want them to learn. So it doesn't have to be exactly what you're going to ask them on a test, but it should be similar so that they can work through the issues that they have. And this is the one thing that's really hard in some disciplines to master, because they want, engineering and a couple of others, they want their students to be able to do this in this high stress environment, but they are just students. And I'm not sure it's fair. And in fact, I heard one engineering faculty who's in chemical engineering say that it may even be borderline unethical to ask students to do something they have never done before. But there you have it. It's practice, practice, practice. Even if it's something, even if it's a complex multi-step problem, you want them to practice it so they know what they're doing. And there's ways to do that that you do not have to repeat that exact problem on an exam. Are there any questions up to here? No? All right, well, feel free. Okay, I'm getting a lot of chat here, but I'm not seeing the chat box. Ah, there it is. Okay. If there's a question, you can just type it into the chat box, or certainly if you've got a microphone, you can stop me. So let's move on, because from here we're going to work on test blueprinting. Has anyone here used test blueprinting, by the way? Okay. I'm not seeing any yes. I'm not seeing any no. I'm not seeing anything. So a test blueprint actually is a strategy to help you look at your exams. It doesn't just have to be exams. It could be activities. But exams are usually what it's used for, and allow you to really pick apart what you're doing. It's a roadmap to develop the test. And and sometimes folks give it to their students so that the students can study for the test. So if you look at what you see on your screen here, you see on the left, in the left column, you see objective 1, objective 2, objective 3, and a total. And across the top row, you see higher level, lower level total. This is one type of test blueprint. I'm going to show you a couple of others. But basically what this will do for an exam is you will go through your exam. You will pick out the questions that correspond to whichever objectives, learning objectives you are teaching, or you're testing, I should say, and whether they're higher level and lower level. And then you put the totals in. Because in essence, that's what matters. So if you're testing, if you've got a 50-question exam and you've got 25 questions on objective 1 and 13 on objective 2 and 12 on objective 3, maybe you're going to think, well, I want to even that up some. I'm asking too many about this one topic. So it's, if you think of it as mindful testing, when you're creating an exam, it's mindful. And some folks do that naturally, and some just don't quite do that. And we have an example here. We're going to do this meteorology example here in a minute. And that's, I'm going to show you what I mean. Because it's very, very common for faculty to not test what they think they're teaching. Okay? They're teaching something, and then they don't test for it. Or they test around it. And that's when students get annoyed. Okay, this is another type of blueprint. You'll notice that this actually sorts out the kinds of questions that you're asking. If it's important to you as a faculty member, and this is the key here. What's important to you as you're constructing your exam? What's important to your content? What's important to your discipline, your students, etc. You know your environment and what makes sense to you. So in this case, across in the row on the top, you're looking at different types of questions. So you have multiple choice questions, calculations, and short answers. And if you find that objective 3 is really heavy in the calculation department, maybe you want to rethink that. Then again, depending on what the objective is, maybe you don't. But at least you know. This is where the mindfulness part is. You know what you're doing, and you're making the choice to do it. This is all about doing it mindfully, doing it consciously. This is an example from UNESCO. Again, it's just another version of the same type of thing. This is about, this is from statistics. So if you look at the content, it's frequency distributions, means, variances, correlations, relative standing. And then there are 3 types. We call it facts, computational skills, and understanding. So of these 5 types of content areas, which one is being tested the most heavily? And you can type it or you can say it. Anybody? Oh, you're not shy, are you? Okay, the easy way to see this is, now if you were in front of me, I'd call on someone, but I won't do it here. So you're lucky. You're lucky you're all at a distance. If you look at this and you look at the totals, you'll see that this is pretty heavily weighted toward correlations. And maybe there's a reason for that. However, if there isn't, if it's just because you, as a faculty member, like correlations, and you're asking 20 questions about it, well, okay. Maybe you want to find out, do more with these other content areas. Secondly, if you look at frequency distributions, you will see that there are no computational skills questions when it comes to frequency or relative standing. Maybe it should be that way. Do you mean it to be that way? But that's what a blueprint does. It asks you to make decisions based on really what you have in front of you. All right, so I'm going to ask you, now you're going to have to play along here. I'm going to ask you to get out the handout that says meteorology and storms. Because you're going to write a test blueprint. At the top, excuse me, at the top, you'll see that there are 2 learning objectives for this exam, okay? Match meteorological instruments to their functions and explain how various types of storms develop. So when you look, there's a 6-question quiz on this particular sheet. So what I want you to do is look at each question. And in the topic area, I want you to put I, if it's about an instrument, and S, if it's about a storm. Okay? So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do that. So topic is I if it's an instrument, S if it's a storm, and nothing if it's not either. Everybody have that? Okay. So once you get through that, I want you to go down that second column that says OBJ at the top for objective. And I want you to write for all the questions that are S's or I's, I want you to write which objective it is, 1 or 2. So just for the questions that are S or I, what objective does it pertain to? Okay, so how many questions pertain to storms or instruments? You can just type it into that chat box where it says type message here. Can you see it? Two S and 2 I. Thank you, Toby. Anyone else? Three S and 2 I. Okay. So you found 4 questions, and Toby found 4, and Jay Wire found found 5. Anyone else? Okay, that's Royer says. 2 storms and 1 instrument. Okay, so let's start with Toby, just for fun. What are the 2, and again, you can just type it, what are the 2 questions that you see that are 2 S questions? Just the numbers. Two and 3. Sorry, I was taking a little nap there. 3. So 3 is the eye of the hurricane. So now think about this. Is that really about how storms develop, or is that just a question about a storm? because it's how storms develop, right? About a part of a storm. That really is not about, that's about the storm itself. That's not about how it develops. How it develops certainly is too, because it's how it forms during periods of. So question 3, not so much. Jay says, I agree. Okay, you had 3 storm questions. Jay Wire. So you had 3. You had 2, I guess, 3, and what was your third? I agree the third one. I've changed my mind on. Okay, you're allowed to do that. So that's right. There really, out of these 6 questions, there really is only, oh, well, I could have gone through this. I took a lot of time. So wind speed and direction of the winds aloft are measured by, right, an instrument. And you're going to ask me which one, and I don't know, I'm afraid. Tornadoes form during periods of, it's storms. The eye of the hurricane, it's about, because it's about specific, you know, it has to be a specific hurricane. It really doesn't talk about the development of it, so that it doesn't apply. Percent of the sun's radiant energy also doesn't apply. Visibility is measured by a device called AN, and the greenhouse effect is said to be caused by too much in the atmosphere. Now, this happens to all of us all the time. Students have had this work, they've read it, they've done work on it, they've written papers on it, they've drawn it, whatever it happened to be, and so we're assuming that they should know these things. However, if we tell students that here's the work you're going to be tested on, instruments to their functions and how storms develop, throwing these other sort of questions in really isn't fair. Now, if you want to put a third objective in there, that's fine. But here's where that mindfulness comes in. You make that decision. And so when we look at the objectives here, what you see is we've got 2 that ask questions about the first objective, and only 1 that asks questions about how storms will develop, objective 2. Does anyone disagree with this? I mean, do I have any, you know, what do you think about this? And you can unmute or you can type. I'm happy either way. Okay. All right. Well, as we move along, feel free to just type up in any way you can. All right. So now what we found out is just 3 out of the 6 questions really apply to the test as we've described it to students. So now what do you do? So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at whether they're lower order and higher order, and whether this is what we want the test to judge. Okay, is this what we're going to assess? So, question 1, wind speed and direction of winds aloft may be measured by. Is that a lower order, do you think, question or a higher order question? Oh, you're a tough audience. All right. That's a lower order question because it's basically, it's one of those things when I talked about glucose or when I talked, you know, talk about high blood pressure. Students will match instruments to functions is a no question. They just have to memorize it. All right. So question 2, tornadoes form during periods of higher order, where they have to be able to analyze something, or evaluate something? Or is it a lower order? Low. Yeah, I think, well, no, wait. It's actually not. However, I'm open to that. If in your class it's a lower order, you can put it there. As a rule, anything that takes some kind of analysis, knowing what the wind speed is, knowing what the temperature is, how the drought affects a tornado, would usually be a higher order activity. However, I am willing to, if you think it's low and it's low in the context of your class, then it's a lower order. I mean, it's not just memorizing, it's actually knowing a bunch of different parameters. So it's a little bit different. So lastly, the visibility is measured by, so we have two. Again, this is just knowing what instrument measures. And again, not a real higher or lower, or excuse me, not a real high order question, just knowing what it is. And so when you look at the totals, you'll see that you're sort of leaning, and I don't want to say heavy because it's only 3 questions, but you're leaning toward lower order. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. On occasion, we get questions from different departments here that say, wow, everybody got this question right. There must be something wrong. This is a bad question because everyone got it right. Well, not really. It depends. It depends on what you as the instructor want your students to know. Sometimes you just want to throw a question in that students are just supposed to know. And if all your students know it, and they're supposed to, good for you. You've done your job. So it depends. When we talk, we're not going to do that today, but when we talk about constructing multiple choice tests, there are reasons why you'd want to construct them in certain ways. Because the idea here is to ask questions that students who know the answers, who are good students, will get them right. And students who don't know the answers will not get them right. And so every now and then, it makes sense to ask basic knowledge-based questions that students need to have foundational knowledge on. And so if you're looking at this as your blueprint and you say, okay, my students really need to know these things, I'm going to keep it this way, there's nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely fine. Okay, any questions about what we've gone through so far? No one said we went through so far. All right, so just to wrap this up in a nice little, hopefully in a nice little bow, as you develop a blueprint, this map to testing, you really need to think about what does each column heading mean, because it's going to mean something different to you in your class than it will to the person in the classroom next to you. And you have to do it in the context of your content. So this really is personal in terms of the content you're delivering to your students. And I use the word deliver advisedly. It's not really my favorite way to think about content, but as I said, we see it here a lot. So what does each column heading mean? And whether it's higher level and lower level, or multiple choice questions or calculations or whatever it is, what does it mean and what's the most useful to you? Secondly, would the students know what the headings mean? And this is a really interesting question because we have faculty go around and around about whether students should get these blueprints. And maybe you don't want to give them a complete blueprint, but certainly would help them study if they knew that most of the questions were going to be knowledge-based questions, or most of the questions were going to be more higher order questions, and they've had practice with what that means. All of that stands to help the student learn better. So when, it's your decision whether to give them a blueprint or not. I can tell you, however, that some of our staff here who teach and use blueprints, they do give a version of the blueprint to their students. So the students know what they're dealing with. And it really is helpful to them, particularly, in a higher ed setting, you've got 3 or 4 other courses. And so in that setting, it helps you manage your time better. So, that's up to you. But we advise it if you can. Lastly, when you look at the blueprint, does the assessment represent what you taught? And I know that in a lot of cases, you're all working like in a modular kind of sense. So does it represent what you taught in this last module? Does it represent what you wish to or need to assess? And how you intend to assess it, meaning, is it a multiple choice type of question that will assess it appropriately? Do they need to do a calculation and show their work? Again, this is all about what you think about assessment and how it works for you. So, are there any questions or comments, or do you see that you can use it, that you can't use it, it won't work for you? What do you think?
Feel free to unmute and use your microphones.
Yes, thank you, Laura.
How did you find the blueprint test useful? Janae, do you see yourself using this?
Yeah, I think that an area that I've noticed in my first year of teaching that I definitely need professional development on and improvement on isn't writing assessments that, accurately reflect what my students learn. A lot of what I do is project based, but there's still a time and a place for a more formal, for lack of a better term, assessment. And so I think that this will be a good thing for me to take into my second semester and kind of reevaluate some of the assessments I've written thus far.
And you can do, it's harder, quote unquote, because it's more complex, but you can do a version of this for projects too, basing it on whatever your rubric is for the project. So rubrics are a whole other topic, as you know. But if you base it on the rubric for your topic, or for your project, you can do a sort of blueprint for the project. If you break out the pieces, what do you expect to see? What would be the best kind of project you could see? That kind of thing. Each one would be different, but it's possible to do that. Anyone else? Okay, everyone's quiet. So I'm going to tell you these are the references. I will share this presentation with Laura, and she can share it with you. Also, she's going to share your user IDs, your emails with us, and we're going to send you an evaluation that comes out of our office. We do feedback with all the, everything we do. And we're happy to hear anything that you would like. In other words, if there are other things that you would like to have or see or hear about, we'd like to know that too. So these are two, as you can see, links that we're happy to share with you. Handouts and contact information are not right there. This was, that shouldn't be there because we're going to send the handouts to Laura. But this is me. If you would like to email me about anything, I'd be happy to talk with you about anything at all. And I want to thank you for your attention today, because I realize, speaking about storms, most of you probably started late today and are probably hanging out longer than you expected because of this storm. So thank you all for your attention, your kind attention. And if you have any other questions, etc., feel free to email me. I'm happy to work with you. And Laura, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Cindy. Thank you so much. For those of you on the call here, I do appreciate you coming. Cindy joined us for our pre-service, pre-internship, what we do before we send the student teachers out. She actually came and presented in person this presentation, and it was really impactful for our pre-service teachers because assessment, like many people, whenever you're student teachers, was something they were concerned about. And I just thought the blueprint, the test blueprint was just a really cool thing that I know that I will definitely use as I, in the future, as I craft assessment instruments. And I just thought it would be really useful for all of you. Are there any last questions for Ms. Raynak? I do want to, if you guys could stay on a couple minutes, I do want to do like a poll or a survey of topics. But before we do that, I just wanted to know if you have any last questions for Ms. Raynak on assessment tools to utilize. Like she said, I will be sending this out to you, so you'll have those links. But any last questions? Okay, wonderful.
Well, thank you all, and thank you for having me, Laura. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I'll be in touch with their emails and contact information.
Great. Thank you.
Thank
Everyone have a
you.
nice